I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Well, this Monday, in celebration of the ATF finally approving the transfer of our Thunder Beast 30P1 suppressor, we are going to answer your suppressor questions. We went over to Facebook, asked you to submit your suppressor questions, and apparently you had plenty of them. So our first question is from TJ. TJ asks, if your suppressor was designed for a higher caliber, would it still be effective if attached to a lower caliber weapon with the same threading? For example, a 308 suppressor attached to a 223 rifle. Well, TJ, it will still be effective. However, putting a 30 caliber suppressor on a 223 rifle will generally not be as effective as a 223 suppressor on a 223 rifle. Now, I say generally because the design of the suppressor, the volume of the suppressor, all that factors into it. Typically, 308 suppressors will have a little bit larger volume than a 223 suppressor, so there may be instances where you may get a design where that 308 suppressor is almost equal to the 223 suppressor because it's a larger overall suppressor. Now, if we're comparing a compact 223 suppressor to a compact 308 suppressor, I think you're probably going to get better suppression with that 223 suppressor. However, what a lot of guys will generally do is if you have several different systems in your safe, 308, 300 Win Mag, 223, 22, etc., then buy the largest caliber suppressor to match the largest caliber rifle in your setup. And then you can use various different adapters and various different techniques to step that can down and use it on the smaller rifles. Several different companies out there, for instance, Gemtech, do make step downs to go from the industry standard 308 threading to industry standard 223/22 threading. So you can use the 308 direct thread cans on those smaller rifles. Additionally, companies like Surefire with their quick attach suppressors will set things up so that there are muzzle devices. For instance, you can take a SOCOM, a 7.62 SOCOM brake, and a 223 SOCOM brake, put them on their respective platforms, and then take a 7.62 SOCOM suppressor, lock it on the 7.62 or lock it on the 223. It will work on both of those the last time I checked. Now, obviously, make sure you check with your Surefire dealer before you go out and purchase one with the intention to do that. But the last time I checked, that was possible on the Surefire devices. Now, they don't allow you to go the other direction. A 223 suppressor will not go on to a 7.62 muzzle device for obvious reasons. But doing it that way allows you to get the most out of one suppressor, because unfortunately here in the States, it does take us a while to get these suppressors done. I submitted the paperwork for this suppressor in November, and for those of you that are really looking for timelines, it was a trust transfer. I submitted it in November. The paperwork was approved on July 10th, and because of some hangups here with my local FFL, we didn't get it until last week. So it does take a little while to get that transfer through, and you're talking about a $1,000 suppressor, so it's important to try to get the most use out of that as possible. So yes, buy for the largest rifle you have and use it on the smaller ones. Now, in the grand scheme of things, what I would suggest you then do is once you have that largest rifle covered, then the next suppressor purchase you go for your most used rifle. So if you have a 300 Win Mag and you have a 223 and you use the 223 more than the 300 Win Mag, then the next suppressor, get the suppressor for the 223. Or if you got a little 22, get the suppressor for the 22, because I guarantee you that will have a maximum amount of giggle factor. Our next question comes from Jesse, and Jesse asks, does a suppressor reduce recoil better or worse than a good brake? Well, Jesse, unfortunately, I don't have any empirical data out there for you to be able to tell you yes it does and yes it doesn't. Again, we run into that situation where there is a massive amount of designs out there, both in suppressors and more so in muzzle brakes. I have used muzzle brakes that were not very effective. I've used muzzle brakes that were highly effective, but also great big huge loud muzzle brakes. So as a rule of thumb, what I would say is suppressors are more effective than the lowest end brakes, and they are probably a little less effective than the best recoil reducing brakes out there. Now the problem there is the best recoil reducing brakes out there are also the ones that create the most blast. For instance, the small single chamber brake that we have on this rifle right now, this is an AAC single chamber brake. It is decently effective at mitigating the recoil of the system, but it is fairly loud. Shooting this rifle on the ground between two concrete benches at the local firing range, it feels like somebody's kicking you in the back of the head every time you fire, and that starts to wear down on you just a little bit. We put on the suppressor, and I really couldn't detect between this brake and this can, I really couldn't detect a increase in recoil. I would bet that there's probably a little bit reduction in recoil because I'm adding weight to the system as well as adding recoil abatement. So I would feel that the suppressor in this instance is more effective than this brake. Now when we switch over to something like Sarah's rifle that has the great big JP tactical recoil eliminator on it, not the tank brake, but it's got the great big 2-chamber brake on it, that thing is absolutely wicked. It is a very, very effective brake, but it is incredibly brutal on recoil. You do not want to be next to that rifle on the firing line. I'm going to be interested to get this suppressor on that rifle and swap it out with that brake, but my gut tells me that it is probably not going to be as effective reducing recoil on that rifle as that big brake. Now we're talking just tiny little fractions here. I really wish I had a rig here that I could set up and I could do some recoil testing on. I've thought a couple of times about rigs that I could set up to be able to do that, and we may see in the future if we start testing some more brakes and stuff about a rig like that, and then we'll reintroduce this whole question then and see if we can get some actual empirical data, not just feel at my shoulder. So I know that's not really a great answer, but it gives you a little bit to think about if we're actually trying to deduce numbers versus the effectiveness to the shooter of a brake versus a suppressor. Our next question comes from Donovan. Donovan asks how to make a 22 suppressor wet. And Josh asks, what do guys mean when they run a suppressor wet? Well, first of all, what guys mean when they talk about running a can wet is they are adding an ablative substance to the inside of the suppressor, and that substance can be anything from gels to liquids, water, Gatorade, soda, whatever. All we're doing is we are putting a liquid in the can so that when all that gas blows into the can from the rifle, it vaporizes that and it helps to cool down those hot gases going through the can, because that's really all the suppressor is doing anyways. It's taking that violent explosion and it's rapidly slowing and cooling it down so that when it leaves the front of the rifle, it leaves so at a slower velocity, and that's what gives us our sound reduction when we're working with suppressors. Running a can wet just assists in that. Now you really don't want to do it with rifle suppressors. That bullet is coming out of there very fast. You're getting a ton of pressure, and adding liquids to it can sometimes increase the pressure inside that can. So unless the manufacturer has said, yes, you can do it with our can, don't do it. It is usually done with handgun and subsonic suppressors, and again, unless your manufacturer says it's okay, I don't suggest doing it. But let's say this was a 9mm suppressor here. Then to shoot it wet, what we would do is we would unscrew the suppressor from the host weapon. We would introduce a capful or two of water into the suppressor, or a squirt of line pulling gel or wire pulling gel into it, screw everything back together, and then when you shoot it, it distributes that gel throughout the inside of the suppressor and would help to cool that gas down. That process would be the same if you would do it on a 22. However, I would not do it on a 22. 22 suppressors are very effective because you have a very small cartridge and you have quite a bit of volume inside the suppressor. When I shoot this thing, which is a Gemtech Outback 2 on a Walther P22, when I shoot standard velocity ammunition through here, all you hear is pretty much the slide slapping back and forth. This is an absolutely ear-safe handgun. I take my boys out and we can shoot this thing with no ear protection on whatsoever. You don't get a ringing in your ears, nothing. So a 22 suppressor really does not need any ablative. It does not need to be shot wet in any way, shape, or form. So I wouldn't do it. You're going to add some mess to the system. You're circulating liquids and stuff around in a cavity that's filled with lead, and then you got to deal with that later on. So I just really would not do it on a 22. On centerfire handgun suppressors, it can increase the effectiveness of the suppressor considerably if the manufacturer approves that kind of use. There are several suppressors out there that are very compact, and they still use a wipe for the front baffle, and you can fill those up with ablative and carry them around and not worry about it falling out. So there are some really cool designs out there that are designed to run wet, but you want to make sure that the manufacturer says that that's okay before you go ahead. Our next question comes from David. David asks, why did you choose direct thread versus quick mount version? Well, David, when I picked out the Thunder Beast 30P1, it was specifically to use it in a precision rifle environment. I wanted to specifically use it on match rifles that I'm just really getting down into that last degree of accuracy with. And it is my opinion that the direct thread is a simpler system. There's less to go wrong with it. And threads on threads is a system that we've been using to hold two machine parts together for a very, very long time. It works great. When you start to move over into all the different kind of quick attach devices, some work better than others. Some are fairly effective in getting a really good return to zero. Some are not so much. Some are very good in hanging on and not coming loose as you shoot them, and again, some not so much. When we tested the suppressed armament systems Arbiter suppressor on the AX308, we found that that had a very, very good return to zero. We were shooting them in exactly the same group, taking it off and putting it back on each time. There was a little bit of a zero shift from unsuppressed to suppressed, but once we started clicking that suppressor on there, all the suppressed shots were in the same shot group, and it worked very well. What we saw when we took this bad boy out and shot it for the first time, we shot a 5-shot group, loosening and tightening the suppressor each time between each shot, and it again shot a very tight shot group. So on both sides of the fence, quick attach or thread, you can get very good return to zero, and you can get very good holding throughout the time the suppressor is mounted. Now, specifically, I went with direct thread because I didn't want to have to buy a bunch of different muzzle devices for all the different rifles, because I've got several different muzzle devices across my rifles. With the direct thread, I can just simply spin off whichever muzzle device is on that rifle. I can spin the suppressor on, and as long as I've kept good record keeping on the difference in zero between the two muzzle devices, we can dial that in and we can gas on. It's simple. It's a lighter weight system because we don't have to have all the metal and all the mechanism in there. There's nothing to carbon up. There's nothing to fail. And it's highly unlikely that I'm going to wear it out, because after putting it on and taking it off through several times, I'm going to end up replacing the barrel, because I'm just going to shoot the barrel out, and then I'll have fresh threads on the barrel to start again. So that's why I went with the direct thread. Now, on an AR type system, or if you have one suppressor that you want to constantly use across a wide variety of rifles, and you can afford to replace the muzzle device on each one of those rifles with the specific quick release device for that suppressor, then a good high quality QD suppressor may be the way to go, because then you can just keep this on the top shelf of the safe, grab whichever rifle you go into the range with, grab the suppressor, lock it on, and go. You can keep the rifle zeroed for its suppressed state if you're always going to run it with the suppressor on, and no problems whatsoever. So there's really no right or wrong answer, but simplicity is really the reason that I went with the direct attach. Nothing to go wrong with it. It's the highest probability of accuracy in the system and repeatability in the system. Greg asks, what happens if you have a baffle strike? Are you SOL? Well, Greg, that depends upon why you had the baffle strike, and of course it depends on who actually manufactured the suppressor for you and what their warranty terms are. Some manufacturers will repair the can under warranty under certain baffle strike conditions. Some will charge you a fee, but the main thing is, as long as the external tube of the suppressor is intact, then they can repair the internals of the suppressor. Now, if you have a baffle strike that is so violent, for instance on the Thunder Beast, I've got a serial number right here on the end of the can. If I had a baffle strike that was so violent that it blew apart the section of the can that had the serial number on it, the suppressor manufacturers are not allowed by the ATF to remark a serial number on a can or replace the outer body, the serialized part of the can. So in that case, they would have to make a new suppressor, and I would end up having to go through a new transfer and pay a new transfer tax and all that stuff. But as long as the outer body of the suppressor is fine, if they need to repair internals on the suppressor, that can be done without having to do all the new paperwork with the ATF. And then it's just between you and the suppressor manufacturer on if you're going to have to pay for the damage or not. The best thing is just to avoid baffle strikes altogether. Make sure that if you're shooting a new load, that the load is stable out of the rifle without the suppressor attached. Shoot at close range to make sure you're getting those nice tight holes in the paper. Anytime you switch anything up, test it without the suppressor first. When we put this suppressor on this rifle, it had never had a suppressor on it before. And this is a Remington factory barrel on here. Remington threaded the barrel on assembly line. So we double checked and triple checked to make sure that everything was lined up, that the threads were concentric to the bore, so we didn't have any problems. And we did that simply by pulling the bolt, sighting through the barrel, and I couldn't see any of the outer edge of the suppressor. I just saw rifling when I was looking dead center down the bore. So I knew we were good to go. We weren't going to have a baffle strike. At least we weren't going to have a catastrophic baffle strike. After that first 5 shots, I still pulled the suppressor off and I looked at the end cap here to make sure I didn't have any copper streaks on the end cap. But we were good to go. No problems there whatsoever. So if you are SOL on a baffle strike or not really depends on the severity of it and the manufacturer of your can. Our next question is from Tyler, and Tyler asks, if your barrel's already threaded with correct pitch, do you have to get it rethreaded concentric to the bore? Well, Tyler, if your barrel is already threaded, like I just mentioned with our AACSD Remington 700 here, if the barrel is already threaded to the correct pitch for your suppressor and it's concentric to the bore, then no, you're good to go. Just screw your suppressor on and rock on. However, if, for instance, we'll use an AK because they're notorious for not being threaded concentric. If you have an AK, I would not take this can, throw an adapter on an AK-47, and then try to shoot this can. AKs, if they're not concentric to the bore, well, if any rifle is not concentric to the bore, then you run a high potential for getting baffle strikes. Even if you don't get a severe baffle strike that damages the can, you may get just a light enough strike that you're going to have accuracy issues with it. I've had that before with the 22 can where the bullet was just barely kissing the last baffle and it was throwing its accuracy just to pieces. So you always want to make sure that your threading is concentric to the bore. And it may be something as simple as taking it to your local gunsmith if you don't feel confident, and having them check it out for you and make sure that those threads are concentric to the bore. And what that means is the bore of the rifle is going dead center straight through the middle of the threads of the rifle, that you have absolutely the exact same amount of barrel material all the way around those threads around the bore of your rifle. So concentricity is vitally important, especially when we're talking about precision rifles. So make sure it's concentric to the bore before you fire that first shot, or do like we did, thread the suppressor on, sight down the bore. That's actually the method that Thunder Beast has outlined in their owner's manual for their suppressors. So sight down your barrel. If you see any portion of the can when you're looking dead center down the bore of the rifle, stop, take it to a gunsmith, have it checked out, maybe have the threads recut perfectly concentric. Our next question is from Peter, and Peter asks, do you feel the ban, by ban I mean having to apply for the tax stamp with the ATF and wait a year on suppressors is necessary in the US? Over here in Norway, we currently have no laws regarding suppressors, and anyone are free to buy them, and they are therefore very popular. Almost any long-range or hunting shooter has one on their rifle. Both the people and the government view it as a way to save hearing and make people shoot better. Thanks for the videos. Well, unfortunately, unlike Norway, here in the US, we really have a lot of misinformation regarding suppressors. Because they are a little bit more difficult to get than your average rifle, a lot of people, even gun owners, don't understand the regulations regarding them. They don't understand the benefits and the drawbacks of suppressors. That, and because of economy of scale, suppressors in the US tend to be fairly expensive because they're producing a smaller quantity of them. Now, I don't feel the prohibitions on suppressors are warranted at all, and I also don't feel that they help anything at all. The firearm is the part that launches the bullet that is capable of killing. The firearm is already governed by a ton of different restrictions that already ineffectively attempt to keep it out of the hands of criminals. A suppressor is just simply a chunk of metal with holes and threads on it. The only way that this could hurt anybody in any way, shape, or form is if it was used as an improvised impact weapon. That is the only way that a suppressor can do any damage to a person. And I don't see a lot of criminals running around beating people to death with suppressors. In fact, I don't see a whole lot of criminals running around using suppressors on firearms. And even if they were readily available, I don't believe that that would really alter our crime statistics in any way, shape, or form. So honestly, I think suppressors should be deregulated. I think that they should fall under the exact same laws as a standard firearm. I think you should be able to have these sitting in a bucket at the counter of your local gun store. And I think when you buy a rifle, pistol, etc., the next words out of your gun shop owner's mouth should be, would you like a suppressor with that? You know, kind of like McDonald's, would you like fries with that? I would love to see these all up and down the firing line. I'd love to see us get rid of the $200 tax. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon because the ATF is processing so many tax stamps right now that they are having trouble keeping up with them. So each one of these that we buy is a $200 profit for the federal government. So there's not a whole lot of drive to get these deregulated by the government. Now, it will greatly reduce the amount of paperwork that they would need to process, greatly reduce their manpower, but that's probably not what they're looking for. Smaller government generally does not seem to be the whole aim of the current administration. So I know I rambled a little bit on that, but in short, I don't believe there should be any greater restrictions on suppressors than there are on firearms now. I don't think we should have to pay a $200 tax for them. I think anybody that is eligible to buy a firearm should be able to buy a suppressor. And I think if they want to add laws for suppressors on the books, then I think they should make it a capital crime to use a suppressor in the commission of a crime and go after the criminals instead of going after the law-abiding people that just want to make shooting a more enjoyable experience. That's what I think about that. Our next question comes from Lynette. And Lynette asks, question is not specific to suppressors, but muzzle brakes that attach directly to threads, no crush washers or shims. Do you permanently install them on your barrels using Loctite or rock set, or tend to take them out during cleaning? How much torque do you use when installing them straight to shoulder? I often hear the term snug, but would prefer a more measurable answer to prevent damage to the barrel. Thanks for your hard work producing Mail Call Mondays. Well, Lynette, a couple of things on your question. First of all, most of the muzzle devices that I use have some kind of mechanism to index them, either crush washers or shims. Now, there is a way to index muzzle devices without crush washers or shims, and what that generally entails is taking the rifle to a rifle smith where he can chuck the barrel up in a lathe and he will cut the shoulder down until the muzzle device indexes correctly. I generally do not do that because that adds expense, it adds time, and it just really isn't necessary with a lot of the muzzle devices that are out there. Surefire provides shims with their SOCOM brakes because that's an acceptable way to put the brake on and get lined up correctly. Now, as far as removing them, once I install a brake, I generally do not remove it for cleaning unless there's a problem. If I start to have some kind of accuracy issues, then I may pull it off to both inspect the crown and clean the gunk off of the end of the device. Sometimes if your muzzle device allows the crown of the rifle to be recessed back inside the device, then you'll get carbon that will build up around the edges of the muzzle, and it can cause some accuracy issues down the road. The AAC brake that I have on here, obviously it's a no mount brake. It doesn't have anything set up to where a suppressor attaches to it, but they did a really good job in designing it because the crown comes up pretty much flush with the inside of the brake here, and I can, if I need to clean off the crown for whatever reason, I can get in there with a soft bristle brush and some solvent, and I can actually get at the crown of the barrel without removing the muzzle device. Now, as far as installing the muzzle device, I do generally just install them tight enough. I don't get on here with a torque wrench and crank down on them. Now, the general recommended torque rating is 30 foot-pounds. You really don't want to go over 30 foot-pounds because you can start constricting the barrel right there at the muzzle. If you really crank down on the torque, you can stretch it, you can do all kinds of really weird stuff with it, because remember, you are pushing the shoulder of the brake against the shoulder of the barrel and pulling forward on those threads as you tighten it down. So you don't want to distort the rifling inside the muzzle of your rifle in any way, shape, or form. So 30 foot-pounds is really the maximum. If you have to go beyond that, then you need to back it off. You need to figure out what's going on and either address the system that you're using to index that brake or something of that nature. Now, if we are using a device that does not need to be indexed, or I'm using indexing shims where I can line it up and get the device to where it makes contact right where I want it to make contact, then I'll only give it a bump to get it snug to hold on there. That way I'm imparting the minimum amount of force onto the threads, and I have very little chance of actually affecting the inside dimensions of that barrel. When I put a suppressor on, I'll put the suppressor on and crank it down as tight as I can crank it down barehanded, because I know with just bare hands and with the smooth outer diameter of the suppressor, I'm not going to be able to apply enough pressure to it to damage the barrel. So I can crank that down as hard as I possibly can. I'll usually carry a strap wrench with me in my bag. That way, if it's gotten carboned up or heated on there and I can't get it back off, I can throw the strap wrench on there to back it off. And strap wrenches are nice. They have rubber contact areas, so as long as the can has cooled down to where it won't melt the rubber, then I can get on there, back it off, and I'm not going to damage the finish on the can or scar it up in any way. So that's my general guidelines on installing muzzle devices. Don't exceed 30 foot-pounds. You're good to use shims even with suppressor mounts, but in the end you really want to follow what your manufacturer's directions are as far as installing it. Unless specifically recommended by the manufacturer, I would not use a crush washer to install a muzzle device that I'm going to mount a suppressor to. But as far as brakes like this one here, it's got a crush washer underneath it. It works just fine, goes on quick, and makes installation very easy. John asks, barrel obstructions are clearly dangerous conditions. With the extra real estate the baffles of a suppressor provide for gas expansion, if mud, ice, or any other substance were to cover the end of the suppressor, is this as risky as a plugged barrel? Well, John, anytime you get anything down inside your barrel or down inside the suppressor, it's not a good condition. If you have any way, shape, or form to break things apart and get in there and make sure that there's nothing in the path of the bullet, then you need to do so. As far as if it is as dangerous a condition to get debris inside a suppressor as it is to get debris inside of a barrel, I would say no, it is not. Usually because if you got some light debris, let's say you got some snow pushed back in here, then there's a really good chance that that air column that's racing through the barrel ahead of the bullet is going to help blow some of that stuff out of the path. And because you have lots of recesses in here for stuff to drop out of the path of the bullet, you have less of a chance of blowing it apart like you would the barrel. If you get snow packed down into a barrel, then there's a really good chance that you're just going to blow the end of the barrel up, or you're going to bulge it out, or you're going to cause other issues there. Now, I am not recommending in either instance going ahead and pulling the trigger. In either instance, if I took a fall and punched this thing into the ground, then I'm going to stop. I'm going to pull the suppressor off. I'm going to inspect it. If necessary, I'm going to break out a cleaning rod and a brush, and I'm going to punch the cleaning rod and brush through here to make sure that everything is pushed out, shake out whatever I can possibly shake out, and then put it on and go back to town. But if we're talking just a sheer numbers game, you are less likely to blow apart a barrel if you had a slight amount of debris in a suppressor versus a slight amount of debris in the barrel itself. Neither is a condition you want to mess with though. So just kind of get it straight in your mind. Anytime you punch the barrel into something, or anytime you think you may have debris inside the barrel or inside a suppressor, you need to stop and rectify the problem before you continue shooting. Larry asks, when using suppressors, what action/barrel cleaning techniques work the best, since suppressors seem to cause extra material to collect in the rear sections of your weapon? Well, Larry, when we're talking about bolt-action rifles, there isn't a whole lot of blowback in bolt-action rifles, so you really don't get a lot of gunk back in the chamber or back in the action of the rifle. When we're talking about semi-automatic rifles, especially direct impingement semi-automatic rifles like an AR-15, you get a lot of fouling, a lot of carbon blowback into the action and down into the magazine. So when you clean those rifles, the cleaning process is just going to take a little bit longer. I don't do anything different when I'm cleaning a suppressed direct impingement rifle versus an unsuppressed direct impingement rifle. It's just going to take me a little bit longer because there's more garbage to clean out of the rifle. Aaron asks, is it legal to create your own suppressor if you pay the $200 tax? Well, yes, Aaron, it is absolutely legal. You go through all the same processes that you go through to transfer a suppressor, but instead of filling out the form to transfer, you're filling out a Form 1 to make a suppressor. Once you receive the Form 1 back with your tax stamp solidly affixed to it after you paid your $200 tax, then you can go ahead and you can fire up your lathe or put together your parts and you can make your own suppressor. It's perfectly legal. The same restrictions apply as if you bought a suppressor. So there's that. If you think you got a really cool idea for a suppressor, I highly encourage you to file a Form 1 and put one together. However, what you'll probably find is that because of the time it takes to get the process approved and through, unless you really have a novel idea, I would recommend just going ahead and purchasing a suppressor, because you're going to have that for a while. There's not a really big market for used suppressors out there. Once you transfer it, because that $200 transfer is a sizable portion of the purchase price of a suppressor, you're not going to get a whole lot of value. You're going to have that thing for quite a while. So if you're doing it just for the novelty of doing it, then rock on. Go ahead and file your Form 1, get it back, build your suppressor, send me some pictures of it, because I'd love to see what you put together. But if you're doing it as a practical standpoint, I would suggest just purchasing a suppressor, because the transfer is going to be roughly the same. Nick asks, how does a trust work? I live in PA, and God forbid I have to move to a communist state like New Jersey or New York. What would I do with my suppressor? This is one of the main drawbacks I have about throwing hard-earned cash at one of these. It's very simply, a trust makes it easy for me and my wife both to be able to exert control over a single National Firearms Act controlled item. So once the transfer was approved and I took possession of this suppressor as a member of my trust, the trust actually owns the suppressor. The ATF approved transfer from the federal firearms licensee to the trust. So the trust owns the device. I'm a grantor and trustee. My wife is a grantor and trustee of that trust, which allows us to take control of any property that is in that trust individually. So if I want to go to the range and shoot this suppressor, I grab it out of the safe, grab the rifle, go to the range and shoot the suppressor. I can bring it back, throw it back in the safe. Say the next day my wife wants to take it to the range and shoot the suppressor. She can grab it, go to the range on her own and shoot it. And we are both abiding by the law at that time. Now, this is not possible on an individual transfer. On an individual transfer, if I went to the FFL and they transferred the suppressor directly to me, John McQuay, then I am the only one that may have physical control over that device at any time. So I have to keep it under lock and key when it's not in my physical control. My wife could never take it to the range unless I was present. I would have to actually be present anytime it's anytime it's being used. When my oldest boy comes of age, then he would not be able to take anything to the range and shoot it without me being present. As it sits right now with my trust, when my sons, when they come of age, I can add them to the trust and they can then be able to take control over any of the items in the trust. So it makes it very simple. Now, a trust is not the only way to do this. You can file a corporation and transfer items to a corporation. That works as well. There are a little bit different requirements on a corporation, and it's outside the scope of this video. So again, it may be something you want to discuss with an attorney, but I highly suggest that you do so when we're talking about legal documents and we're talking about anything that violation of could find you in prison for quite some time. But trusts are very handy when you do things like we're doing here. Now, if you purchase an item in one state, say I purchase a suppressor here in Indiana, it's transferred to me here in Indiana, and then for whatever reason I have to move to California. Suppressors are not legal in California, so if I have to go there, I obviously can't take this with me. Well, I can leave the device in a state where it's legal to have the device and move to somewhere else. And that just means I get to come back and visit it whenever I want to come back and visit it. Now, exactly how you go about doing that, there's a bunch of different legalities attached to that, one of which is how it was transferred to you, if it was transferred to an individual, a trust, or a corporation, what the status is at the location that you're going to leave it there. Is that your house? Is it somebody else's house? What their legal status is. Are they a criminal or are they not? I mean, there are a ton of different variables. But the gist of it is you can leave an item in an area where it's legal to own and move to an area where it's not legal to own, and you're going to be good to go there. But that is definitely something that you want to consult an NFA attorney about, or consult the ATF themselves so they can give you the exact specifics. Luckily, that is not a situation that I have had to deal with yet, and I don't ever plan on moving to a state where I can no longer own NFA restricted items. Well, that's about all for this week's Mail Call Mondays. Thanks for sending in all of your great questions. If you've liked this episode, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. I know you guys are going to ask, so real quick, the rifle sitting in front of me, the barreled action is actually the barreled action out of our Budget Precision project. It is a Remington 700 SPS Tactical AAC SD, and it is dropped into a Cadex Strike 30 dual chassis system. We've got a B&T Industries Atlas bipod on the front, a Spur scope mount on top, and the Bushnell XRS scope, and of course the Thunderbeast 30 P1 suppressor up here. Once we get a little bit more trigger time on the Thunderbeast, we are going to do a review video on that. Now, unfortunately, we don't have access to sound testing equipment at this time, so I won't be able to actually get any before or after sound level metering, but we're going to do everything else that we can possibly do on the review as far as accuracy testing, return to zero, all that fun stuff. So stay tuned for that. We need to get some more trigger time downrange with it. We need to really work with it quite a bit more before I'm ready to do the review, but as soon as we can, we'll get that cranked out for you. So again, thank you for watching, and until next time, no matter if it's loud or quiet, get out and shoot.